In this video, I just want to share a material which was my first sort of dab at playing around with Vertex world displacement. So I've disabled it at the moment on this material just to kind of show the base of the material. So it's kind of like an ice where we have got a Fresnel, two colours being lerped just to kind of give a lighter outer edge and a darker inner section, and using a Fresnel to control that linear interpolation that's going into the base colour. I've actually got the noise node, so if I preview that node you'll see that it's just a noise which is the one that's built in using the noise node, which I believe is actually quite expensive, so it might be better off to use a texture, but just for prototyping node on this occasion. And then I've just put that into a multiplier to control the strength of that. It's just at 1 at the moment, so that's kind of fully glossy. I've got opacity just as a scalar. I have got two different normals. So I've got two textures that I'm just adding together, but then giving myself some offset on the U of the UVs, just to be able to create variations very quickly. And then I have made this a subsurface shading model, and therefore the subsurface color pin is exposed, and I've just put another Fresnel in there to have a subsurface color in there. Because we are going to be using the world displacement, I've also set the tessellation to flat, made sure it's crack-free displacement, and I've just also checked the adaptive tessellation. So what is the tessellation doing? So if I put that pin into world displacement, we are selecting and masking the vertices which are at the bottom of the mesh. So here we've got the vertex normal in world space. We're getting a component mask, and then by default R and G are selected. We've actually taken both of those off and gone for B, which is the equivalent to X, Y and Z. So if you've looked at the dusting video, we used the B again, but we were selecting everything that was facing up. We're now selecting all the vertices that are facing down to give us our icicles. Now if I remove this -1, it will be all the vertices facing up. The vertices facing up, but if I multiply that by -1, it's flipping that over and selecting the vertices facing down. And then we have our Z depth, which we control, and we'll go into the material instance in a moment and see how we can affect that. So there, all the component parts. Let's come out of that. Give me a second. Let's spin this around, spin the right way around. So in this material instance, let me undock this, and we can start playing with some of these values to illustrate the point. So the Z depth here is affecting the world displacement on those vertices. Now, the one thing to bear in mind is they're not uniform, and the reason that they're not uniform is because we're actually using and multiplying a texture to give us some variation in the values that we're multiplying by. So depending on how this is mapped to the bottom of the sphere, depending on that value 0 to 1, it's then multiplying and then offsetting the vertices by that amount through the world displacement. So here we now have control over how much we're multiplying that by. So we can kind of exaggerate things a little bit. Then of course we can play around with all sorts of other things. So we've got the UV offset where we're actually controlling the pattern, the scale of the pattern, so it can be much, much tighter. And we can control the Fresnel because I've put in some scalar values there. Let me zoom out for a second. Now, one thing to bear in mind, similarly to the dusting material, the vertices that are in the -z space are the ones that are being weld offset. So it doesn't rotate with, if you see what I mean. So it's kind of fixed. So for example, if we put a cube in, be a bit more evident with the cube. If I now rotate that cube, you can see that the top still remains being a cube, but the vertices that we're facing down are the ones that we've masked out. So it can be quite dramatic. So, you know, it's a very particular effect for choosing elements within an environment and making them feel as if they're frozen and have got icicles coming from them. We've obviously chosen the colours here to represent ice, and obviously it depends on the number of vertices as well. You can obviously increase that as well within your mesh to have a greater effect. So I don't know if that's of use to anyone, but it's fun to play around with anyway and understand the principle behind being in a position to mask out the Z axes, and then by multiplying by -1 we're selecting all the vertices that are facing down, and the sphere, or the, you know, you can play around with that. So free download below, and I hope that is of use. And just as a little aside, I just wanted to show how much you can play around with this idea of weld displacement using the vertex of your mesh. So if we come back into the master material, I've just discreetly popped a panner in here. So we're now actually going to move the texture with the panner. I've just set some basic speeds there, and what I'll do is I'll remove the multiply by -1 so that it affects the vertices on top. So, you know, you're getting weld displacement with the vertices. So this is a bit nuts really, but the fact it's all doing it as a vertex shader. Let's see what we get. Just speed up that camera. So, you know, that's quite dramatic. Practical use, who knows? You don't necessarily always need a practical use. When we're just kind of exploring and playing around with the functionality, but it's quite fun. If we slow that right down in the panel settings, so slightly more amorphous. What for? Who knows? There's not a huge amount of vertices, so it is quite faceted. Thanks a lot. Bye.